I never thought a lazy Saturday afternoon would turn into the moment that changed everything in my life. It all started when my mom asked me to help clean out the garage, just one of those typical chores you never really want to do but can't avoid. I wasn't in the mood, but it's not like I had any better plans. So, I grabbed a box and started sifting through the dusty junk. At first, it was nothing out of the ordinary: old magazines, some broken tools, a few random things that probably should have been thrown out years ago. But then, tucked away in a dark corner, I spotted something. A box that didn't look like the rest. It was heavy, sealed with duct tape, and covered in a thin layer of dust, like no one had touched it in years. My curiosity got the better of me. I knew I probably shouldn't have opened it, but something about it felt off. When I peeled the tape back and lifted the lid, I froze. Inside was a collection of VHS tapes, magazines, and a few DVDs, all with explicit covers. My heart skipped a beat as the realization hit me: this wasn't just some random junk. It was a hidden stash of porn. And not just any porn, this stuff looked ancient, like it had been collected over decades. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My stepfather's secret porn collection, hidden right here in the garage. My mind started racing. Why would he hide this? And more importantly, why hadn't my mom ever found it? I sat there, staring at the box, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do: close it and pretend I never saw it, or keep digging. I didn't get a chance to decide because, just then, I heard footsteps behind me. I whipped around, and there he was with Greg, my stepfather, standing in the doorway, watching me. For a split second, neither of us said anything. The air felt thick, charged with tension. His eyes flicked to the box, then back to me, and I could see the moment he realized what I'd found. "What are you doing?" His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that made me nervous, like he was trying to figure out how much I knew. I scrambled to close the box, trying to play it cool. "Nothing, just helping Mom clean up," I said quickly, my voice a little too high-pitched. But Greg wasn't buying it. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, I felt like I was caught in a trap. "You found that, didn't you?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. There was no point in lying, he knew. The silence between us stretched on, awkward and heavy. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from his. Greg sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't mean for you to find this. It's from a long time ago. Something I forgot about." He tried to sound casual, but there was an edge to his voice, like he was nervous about what I might think of him now. And honestly, I didn't know what to think. My stepfather, the guy who always seemed so normal, had been hiding this, the secret collection, for who knows how long. "It's fine," I muttered, trying to end the conversation before things got weirder. But Greg didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with that same unreadable expression. And for some reason, I couldn't look away. There was something about the way he was looking at me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't anger or shame. It was something else. Something that made my heart race in a way I didn't understand. "You won't tell your mom, right?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost pleading, and it caught me off guard. Greg was always so confident, so sure of himself. Seeing him like this, vulnerable, uncertain, it was strange. And, if I'm being honest, kind of unsettling. "I won't say anything," I said quickly. "It's not my business." I tried to sound casual, like I didn't care, but inside, I was anything but calm. My mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. I wanted to get out of there, to put as much distance between me and that box, and Greg, as possible. But before I could move, he spoke again. "Thanks," he said quietly. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "I appreciate it." There was something in the way he said it that made me feel weird. Like there was more to this than he was letting on. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and quickly turned back to the pile of junk, pretending to sort through it like nothing had happened. But even as I tried to focus on the task at hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Something I didn't fully understand yet. And deep down, I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Trust me, things get crazier from here. You won't believe what happens next. Greg didn't say anything for a long moment, his eyes locked on the box as if he couldn't believe I had actually found it. I shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, feeling the tension in the air grow thicker with each passing second. I wasn't snooping or anything, I blurted out, my voice coming out faster than I intended. I was just helping clean up. He blinked, as if snapping out of a daze, and gave a small nod. Yeah, right. I know. His voice was quieter now, almost unsure, which was weird coming from him. Greg wasn't the kind of guy who got flustered easily. He always carried himself with this calm, confident energy that made you feel like nothing could ever shake him. But right now? He looked shaken. It's old stuff, he added quickly, as if that explained everything. From way back. Nothing important. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? Oh, don't worry, I just accidentally found your secret porn stash, but hey, no big deal? Yeah, that wasn't happening. Instead, I just nodded, hoping he'd take the hint and let this whole thing blow over. But he didn't move. He just stood there, awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to the other, like he was debating whether to say something else. I could feel my palms getting sweaty, and the silence was becoming unbearable. I wanted to escape, to put this whole uncomfortable moment behind me, but something told me Greg wasn't going to let that happen so easily. Finally, he spoke again, his tone cautious. You didn't look through it, did you? No. I said a little too quickly, my voice coming out louder than I intended. I mean, I just opened it and saw what was inside. That's it. I didn't, go through everything. My face felt hot, and I hated how defensive I sounded. I wasn't the one hiding anything, he was. But somehow, standing there under his intense gaze, I felt like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Greg seemed to relax a little at my answer, but the tension didn't completely leave his face. Okay. Good. I didn't want you to get the wrong idea. The wrong idea? What was that supposed to mean? I bit my lip, trying to keep my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. Why was he acting so weird about this? Sure, it was embarrassing, but it wasn't like I was going to run to my mom and tell her all about it. Still, the way he kept watching me made me feel like there was something more going on, something he didn't want me to figure out. Like I said, I muttered, breaking the silence. It's not a big deal. I won't say anything. I just wanted this conversation to end so I could go back to pretending none of this ever happened. Thanks, he said, his voice soft. There was a hint of relief in his tone, but also something else, something I couldn't quite place. I appreciate that. I gave a small nod, hoping that would be enough to end the awkward moment. But instead of leaving, Greg stepped closer, his expression still tense. Listen, I know this might seem strange, but it's not what you think. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely confused now. I wasn't really thinking anything, I said slowly. It's your business, not mine. I just don't want things to be weird between us, he continued, ignoring my attempt to brush it off. You're important to me, and I don't want you thinking. I don't know, something wrong about me. Important? The word caught me off guard. Greg wasn't exactly the sentimental type. He was a good stepdad, kind, supportive, always there when I needed him, but he wasn't someone who talked about feelings. Hearing him say something like that now felt strange. I don't think anything, I said quickly, trying to ease his obvious discomfort. Really, it's fine. I get it. Everyone has stuff they'd rather keep private. He gave a small, tight-lipped smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah. Private. Exactly. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say more, but then he stopped himself, running a hand through his hair again. I guess I should move that box somewhere else, so it doesn't cause any more confusion. Good idea, I muttered, desperate for this conversation to be over. I turned back to the pile of junk, pretending to be busy sorting through it, but I could feel Greg's eyes still on me. It made my skin prickle, like I was under a microscope. Thanks again, he said after a moment, his voice quieter now. For not, saying anything. No problem, I replied, not looking up. I just wanted him to leave so I could finally breathe again. He hesitated for another second before finally turning and walking out of the garage. As soon as he was gone, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were trembling slightly, and my heart was still racing. What the hell had just happened? I glanced back at the box, now sealed shut again, and felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about this whole situation felt off. Greg's reaction wasn't just embarrassment, it was something more, something deeper. And no matter how hard I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. If anything, this was only the beginning. And whatever came next, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Greg cleared his throat again, shifting uncomfortably, and for a second, I thought he might just walk away. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed there, his eyes flicking back to the box like it held some secret he desperately wished I hadn't uncovered. I could see it in his face, he wasn't just embarrassed. He was trying to gauge what I was thinking, what I might do next. It's okay, I repeated, my voice softer now, like I was trying to reassure both of us. I didn't mean to, stumble on it. I was just cleaning up. Greg nodded slowly, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. Yeah. I get it. He paused, his gaze lingering on me a little too long. It's just weird, I guess. You finding that makes me feel like, he trailed off, scratching the back of his neck, clearly struggling to put his thoughts into words. Like what? I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. I didn't mean to push, but something about the way he was acting made it impossible to just let it go. There was something more to this, something he wasn't saying, and I could feel it hanging in the air between us. Like I don't know how you see me now, he admitted quietly, avoiding my eyes. I mean, you've known me for years, and now, this. I don't want you thinking I'm some kind of. I don't know. Some kind of what? A creep? A weirdo? The words hung unspoken in the air, but I knew that's what he was thinking. And honestly, I didn't know what I thought. Finding something like that, it wasn't exactly normal, but it wasn't the end of the world either. Still, seeing Greg like this, so unsure of himself, was unsettling. He was always the steady one, the calm presence in the house. Seeing him nervous, almost vulnerable, it threw me off. I don't think anything, I said finally, hoping it would ease some of the tension. It's just stuff. Everybody has their secrets, right? He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to figure out if I really meant it. Yeah. I guess so. He smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Thanks. I mean, for not freaking out. Why would I freak out? I asked, trying to lighten the mood. It's not like you're hiding bodies in there or something. Greg laughed at that, a real laugh this time, not the awkward, forced kind from before. Yeah, no bodies. Just old memories. He glanced at the box again, his expression thoughtful. Stuff from before I met your mom. Things I never really got around to throwing out. There was something in the way he said it, memories, that made my stomach twist. This wasn't just some random porn stash he'd forgotten about. It meant something to him. But what? And why did it feel like there was more he wasn't telling me? I wanted to ask, to dig deeper, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way his eyes had softened when he mentioned my mom, or maybe it was the strange, almost wistful tone in his voice. Whatever it was, it made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't ready to face. Anyway, Greg said, breaking the silence. I should probably move this somewhere else. Don't want your mom accidentally finding it. Yeah, I agreed quickly, grateful for the change in subject. Probably a good idea. He bent down to pick up the box, his movements slower than usual, like he was still processing everything that had just happened. I watched him for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. Part of me wanted to help, to offer some kind of reassurance, but another part of me just wanted to get out of there and forget this ever happened. But as he straightened up, the box in his arms, something in his expression stopped me. He looked sad. Not just embarrassed or awkward, but genuinely sad, like he was carrying some kind of invisible weight. And for reasons I couldn't quite explain, that made me feel something. Sympathy, maybe. Or curiosity. Or something else entirely. You okay? I asked before I could stop myself. Greg blinked, clearly surprised by the question. Yeah. Just tired, I guess. He gave me another faint smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Long day. I nodded, not really knowing what else to say. Well, I'll let you get back to it. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, Greg spoke again. Hey, he said quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Thanks. For, being cool about this. I glanced back at him, meeting his eyes. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The tension from before was still there, but it felt different now. Softer, somehow. More complicated. Yeah, I said finally, giving him a small smile. No problem. I turned and walked out of the garage, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. I tried to shake it off, to focus on anything else, but it was no use. The image of Greg standing there, holding that box, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name, it stuck with me. As I headed back into the house, I couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had I just stumbled into? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning of something much bigger? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear, things weren't going to go back to normal anytime soon. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not really. Greg wasn't distant, but he wasn't his usual laid-back self either. There was something about the way he acted, subtle but noticeable. Every time we crossed paths in the house, I felt it, a tension that hadn't been there before. Like we were both aware of something unspoken, something neither of us wanted to address, but couldn't ignore. I caught myself thinking about that moment in the garage more than I wanted to admit. His expression, the nervousness in his voice, it replayed in my mind on a loop, making it impossible to forget. I tried to shake it off, but the harder I tried, the more it stuck. And the weird part? It wasn't just embarrassment that kept creeping back in, it was something deeper. Something I didn't quite understand. One night, I was sitting alone in the living room, scrolling through my phone and trying to distract myself. The house was quiet, Mom had gone to bed early, and Greg was somewhere upstairs. Or at least, that's what I thought, until I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting him to pass by on his way to the kitchen, but instead, he stopped in the doorway. He hesitated for a moment before stepping into the room, his expression unreadable. Hey, he said quietly. Hey, I replied, trying to sound casual, though my heart was already racing. There was something in his voice that set me on edge, soft, cautious, like he was trying to ease into something he wasn't sure how to say. He walked over and sat down next to me on the couch, keeping a little more distance than usual. That alone was enough to make the air feel heavier. We'd sat together plenty of times before, watching TV or just hanging out, but this felt different. Can we talk? He asked after a long pause, his eyes fixed on the floor. Yeah, sure, I said, setting my phone down. I wasn't sure where this was going, but something told me it wasn't going to be a casual chat. Greg took a deep breath, his hands resting on his knees. About what happened in the garage. I tensed slightly, but I didn't say anything. I just nodded, waiting for him to continue. I don't want things to be weird between us, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I feel like I don't know. Like something's changed, and I hate that. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable around me. I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to say it was fine and that he didn't need to worry about it. But another part of me, the part that couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the garage, knew that wasn't entirely true. It's not uncomfortable, I said finally, choosing my words carefully. It's just different. I don't know why, but it is. Greg looked up then, meeting my eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. There was something in his gaze, something vulnerable, almost pleading. I get it, he said softly. I feel it too. And I don't want it to be like that. I don't want us to drift apart, or whatever this is. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Greg wasn't the kind of person who talked about feelings. He was more the type to crack a joke or change the subject when things got too serious. Hearing him say something like that now, it made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. We don't have to drift apart, I said, trying to sound reassuring. It's just weird right now. But it doesn't have to stay that way. He smiled faintly, though it was more out of relief than anything else. Thanks. I didn't want to leave it hanging, you know? I didn't want you thinking I was avoiding you or something. I wasn't thinking that, I said quickly. I mean, I noticed things felt off, but I figured we'd just get past it. Yeah, he said, leaning back slightly, his posture relaxing for the first time. I guess I just needed to say it out loud. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension easing slightly but not completely disappearing. It was better, but there was still something lingering in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. You know, Greg said after a while, his voice softer now, I never really thanked you. For not freaking out, I mean. And for not saying anything to your mom. You don't have to thank me, I said with a shrug. It's not my business. I wasn't planning on saying anything anyway. He nodded, his eyes still on me, and for a moment, I thought he might say something else. But instead, he just smiled, small, genuine, and almost grateful. Good, he said quietly. I'm glad we talked. Me too, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I meant by that. The conversation had helped, sure, but it hadn't exactly cleared the air completely. There was still something there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be addressed. I just didn't know when, or if we'd ever actually talk about it. Greg stood then, giving me a small wave before heading toward the stairs. Good night, he said over his shoulder. Good night, I echoed, watching him disappear down the hall. As soon as he was gone, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My mind was buzzing with everything that had just been said, and everything that hadn't. Things were better now, sure. But were they normal? Not even close. And deep down, I had a feeling that normal was something we might not get back to. Not after this. Not after the way things had started to shift between us. I didn't know where it was going, but one thing was clear, this wasn't the end of it. If anything, it felt like we were just getting started. It's not weird, I said quickly, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Was it weird? Maybe. Probably. But I couldn't bring myself to admit it, not out loud, not to him, and definitely not to myself. Greg gave me this look, one I couldn't quite read. It wasn't his usual calm or awkward smile, it was deeper, mixed with something else. Gratitude? Hesitation? Maybe both. He started, his voice quieter now, like he was forcing himself to say something he wasn't ready for. I don't want you thinking I'm some kind of creep. You're not, I said softly, cutting him off before he could spiral further. It was just unexpected. That much was true. None of this had been expected. I wasn't ready for the way it had unfolded, the way it kept playing out in my mind when I was alone. But saying it out loud made it feel almost manageable, like I could pretend this was just another awkward moment we'd eventually laugh about someday. Greg smiled faintly, and for a second, it felt like we had managed to claw our way back to something resembling normal. But then, in the space of a heartbeat, things shifted again. He leaned in just a little. It wasn't much, barely anything, really. But I noticed. I felt it. And the worst part? I didn't pull away. I should have. I knew I should have. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to break the moment before it went too far. But I didn't. I stayed right where I was, my breath catching in my throat as his hand brushed against mine. The contact was barely there, so light it could have been an accident. But it wasn't. We both knew it wasn't. Time seemed to slow, stretching out in that charged silence. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. This was wrong, this couldn't happen, I needed to stop it, but my body didn't move. There was something in that moment, something forbidden and electric, that made me stay. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Everything was said in the way our eyes met, in the way neither of us pulled back. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall was inevitable but still teetering on the brink, caught between fear and the thrill of the unknown. And then it happened. He leaned in just a little more, closing the tiny distance between us. Our lips met, not rushed, not frantic, but slow, tentative, like we were both testing the waters of something we weren't supposed to touch. It should have felt wrong. It should have made me recoil in shock, in guilt. But it didn't. It felt real. The warmth of his hand, the weight of his presence, it was grounding in a way I didn't expect. I didn't want to think about what it meant or where it would lead. I just let myself get lost in that moment, in the rush of something we both knew couldn't last. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke for a long moment. The air between us felt different, charged, heavy, yet somehow calmer. Greg looked at me, his expression a mix of uncertainty and something else I couldn't quite name. "That probably shouldn't have happened," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Probably," I agreed, though my heart wasn't in it. Because even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. A part of me didn't regret it. A part of me didn't want to take it back. Greg ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I don't want you to feel weird about this," he said. I don't know what came over me, but... "I don't feel weird," I interrupted, more forcefully than I intended. "It's complicated, sure. But weird? No." My voice softened as I added, "Let's just not overthink it." "Not right now." He nodded, though the tension didn't entirely leave his face. "Okay. Yeah. Not right now." We sat there in silence for a few more minutes, either of us really knowing what to say. Eventually, Greg stood, giving me one last uncertain glance before heading toward the stairs. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night," I echoed, watching him disappear down the hall. As soon as he was gone, I let out a long breath, my mind reeling from everything that had just happened. What had we done? And more importantly, what did it mean? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain, things were never going back to how they were before. Whatever this was, it had changed everything. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. That night was just the beginning. What happened after? Well, let's just say it got a whole lot more complicated. But I'll save that for another time. If you made it this far, I've got one question for you. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out myself.